67 years ago, a married couple was thrown before a local Virginia court, and the white judge looked them in the eye and said, "Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents, and he never intended for them to mix." This isn't ancient history. This happened to a real couple in 1958 who changed the course of American history. Mildred Loving was a simple construction worker. He'd grown up in rural Virginia, where everybody knew everybody, and life moved slowly. Mildred Jeter was his childhood friend. They grew up in the same small town of Central Point, running through the same dirt roads, sharing the same dreams. They fell in love the way most people do, gradually, then all at once. But there was one problem: their skin color. Richard was white and Mildred was black. And in 1958, Virginia, that combination wasn't just frowned upon, it was a felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So when Richard and Mildred decided they wanted to spend their lives together, he was 24 and she was just 18, they knew their home state wouldn't let them. They drove 5 hours north to Washington, D.C., stood before a courthouse clerk, exchanged vows, and became husband and wife.
But then they made their first mistake. They went home. 5 weeks later, on the 11th of July, 1958, it was the middle of the night. Sheriff Garnet Brooks and 2 deputies burst into their bedroom with blazing flashlights. Mildred woke up terrified, disoriented. Richard shot up in bed. "What are you doing in our house?" The sheriff's response was ice cold. "We're here to arrest you for getting married." Mildred pointed to their marriage certificate, hanging on the wall, indicating the proof that everything was legal. The sheriff glanced at it and laughed. "That's no good here." They were arrested in their own bedroom, handcuffed, and thrown into separate jail cells. Their charge? Cohabiting as man and wife against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. Richard, being white, was released on bail, but poor Mildred wasn't. She spent 5 days locked up, terrified, alone, not knowing when or if she'd see her husband again. And here's what makes this even darker. This wasn't some rogue cop on a power trip. This was the law. When they finally stood before Judge Leon Bazile in January 1959, they expected justice, but what they got was a sermon. The judge looked down at them and said, "Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix." He wasn't speaking as a judge. He was speaking as if he had God on speed dial. Then came the sentence, which was a choice designed to destroy them. 1 year in prison, or leave Virginia for 25 years. Think about that. 25 years. That's longer than most people's marriages. Longer than Richard and Mildred had even been alive. They couldn't risk living in prison, so they chose exile. They packed up, left behind their families, their land, their entire world. They moved to Washington, D.C., crammed into a small apartment in a crowded city, far from everything that felt like home. Richard found work. Mildred took care of their growing family. They now had 3 kids. But for Mildred, Washington could never be home, and she couldn't stop thinking, why should loving someone be a crime? Years passed, but the pain didn't. Then, in 1963, Mildred saw something on the news that gave her an idea. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum. People were marching, fighting back, and one name kept appearing: Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, a man who seemed to actually care about justice. So Mildred did something bold. She wrote him a letter. Not a legal document, not a formal petition, just a letter from a heartbroken woman asking for help.
"We know we can't live there, but we would like to go back once in a while to visit our families and friends."
Kennedy didn't ignore her. He forwarded her letter to the American Civil Liberties Union. That's when 2 young lawyers, Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf, read her story. And they realized something explosive. This wasn't just about Richard and Mildred. This was about every interracial couple in America. At that time, 16 states still had laws banning interracial marriage. 16. That's nearly a third of the country. Cohen and Hirschkopf took the case. Not for fame, not for money. They took it because they knew this was bigger than one couple in Virginia. They were going to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. The case climbed the legal ladder, from local court to the state court to the appeals court. But every time, Virginia fought back hard. Their strongest argument? The law applied equally. White people couldn't marry black people couldn't marry white people. See? Equal. But Cohen wasn't buying it. Standing before the 9 justices of the Supreme Court in April 1967, he made his case. These statutes deprive the Lovings of liberty without due process of law. They deprive them of the right to marry, which is a fundamental freedom. Virginia's lawyer fired back with the same tired defense: tradition, states' rights, the will of the people. Then Cohen dropped the hammer. Tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia. Those were Richard's words, not from a lawyer, not from an activist, from a simple man who just wanted to live with his wife. The courtroom went silent. 9 justices sat with that line. Because when you strip away all the laws, all the arguments, all the history, it came down to one simple truth. 2 people loved each other, and the government said they couldn't. On June 12, 1967, Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the unanimous decision. Marriage is one of the basic civil rights of man, fundamental to our very existence and survival. Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. In one ruling, the Supreme Court struck down anti-miscegenation laws in all 16 remaining states. Interracial marriage was finally legal all across America. And that victory didn't just change the Lovings' lives, it rewrote American history. Want proof? Barack Obama's parents, a white woman from Kansas and a black man from Kenya, married in 1961. Their marriage would have been illegal in 22 states until the Lovings won. The 44th President of the United States exists because of the success of Lovings against Virginia. Richard didn't want speeches and parades. He once told a reporter, "We're not doing it for any cause. We're doing it for us."
But unfortunately, a few years later, a drunk driver killed Richard Loving in 1975 when he was only 41 years of age. But Mildred lived until 2008, long enough to see their case cited in arguments for marriage equality, long enough to see love, in all its forms, slowly become protected by law. She rarely gave interviews, but in 2007, on the 40th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision, she released one statement. "I believe all Americans, no matter their race, no matter their sex, no matter their sexual orientation, should have that same freedom to marry." She understood what so many still don't. Love isn't political, it's personal, it's human, and it's everything. They didn't shout, they didn't riot, and somehow, impossibly, beautifully, that was enough to change America.